What's up, everyone? This is Sam from Cinema 3D. So I recently had a buddy of mine watch the Dceu movies for the first time. And so basically the way it happened was he really wanted to get into DC because I've been talking about the heroes a lot, and I had just gotten through watching the Dceu for the first time. So I was really on that hype, and he was kind of wondering, what is DC all about? How can I get into it? I don't really want to watch animation, I want to watch movies. So I started off showing him the Dark Knight trilogy, and that went over well enough to continue showing him DC movies. And so then from that point on, I had to decide, well, what do I want to show him? So I decided to show him the DCEU movies, starting with Man of Steel and then going all the way to Zack Snyder's Justice League. So we all know that the DCEU has had its hiccups from the beginning. It was definitely trying to keep up with Marvel when it released. When we get Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, that movie itself takes the comics of the death of Superman and the Dark Knight Returns, two things that should be happening way later in these heroes' lives, and puts them in the second film of your main franchise. And that's just kind of mind-blowing to jump from the introduction of Superman in your first movie all the way to events that should happen way later. That doesn't really add up or make sense. And it just feels like the blueprints to do a great DC series was right there with the DC animated universe. And just doing any of these stories, it just seems like there's an obvious answer of how to tell these stories and how to not tell these stories. And the route they went with DC, when they were coming out with the movies especially, it felt weird. Almost 10 years prior, or was it 10 years prior? Yeah, almost 10 years prior, we got the MCU. And we started off with Iron Man, and then we go into the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger, and then we finally get the big build-up movie of the Avengers, and that just seems like a logical way to tell your Marvel story. You start with establishing your big three heroes of the Avengers team being Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, and then you introduce your whole world that these events will be taking place in. That's really built up foundationally with Iron Man, and then going back in time with Captain America, getting some of the interstellar stuff with Thor. Incredible Hulk's a little bit of the loose one there that could or couldn't have been introduced, but he was one of the major players in the Avengers, so having the movie there at least makes sense. So the way Marvel did it, they just knocked it out of the park, and they did what you would think would be the obvious answer. When DC did the DC animated universe, it kickstarts with Superman's birth on Krypton, great introduction, goes through Batman's first time as the Dark Knight and slowly building his way up to becoming where he is now, to where we have this epic meetup of Batman and Superman for the first time, so that when we get to Justice League, everything seems to kind of make sense. But when we started getting the DCEU movies coming out, and they came out with Man of Steel, and then at first we weren't sure, are they going to bring in Christian Bale to be in Batman vs. Superman, or are they going to be doing something completely new and different? We weren't sure at the direction that this was going to go. Then, of course, it ended up coming out that Ben Affleck was going to be Batman. We got Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. And it didn't seem like the logical step to do with this series. And then after that, we got Suicide Squad, which just threw a wrench in the entire story they were trying to build up to Justice League. Then we go to Wonder Woman, we go all the way back in time. Then we come back to the Zack Snyder universe with Justice League, but we didn't even get the real movie officially released. We got Justice League, and we got a completely different movie. So your first, 5 films there? Yeah, your first 5 films in comparison to what Marvel did of building a solid foundation to tell this story was all over the place from Jump Street. So you're looking at the DCEU and you're just thinking, this is a mess. Like, why should I even be excited for Justice League? But then, after my friend watched these movies, it kind of sparked a little almost enlightening within me that they were almost there. I mean, the way they started off this series with Man of Steel, that's a fine introduction. Whether or not we have problems with the way they handled Superman in that movie, whether he doesn't feel too much like Superman, all in all, Man of Steel is a solid enough beginning. And while we don't necessarily like, or at least me personally, the jump to Batman vs. Superman being your second film, at least it's building on the story of Superman. At least we're establishing the fact that in this universe, Batman has already been Batman for a very long time. He is much older now. So we can't do the entire Batman story building up to it. If they had, the Dark Knight trilogy type of thing behind it to where now we get Batman, that would be even better. But where we are now with that, we have to accept that this is just an older Batman, and he's already been Batman for a while. And then, we get some things about his origin in that movie. So we have some good world building. Alfred, we learn about things that happened with Jason Todd previously and why Batman is the way he is now, but not fully explored. So in terms of just an archetype of a storyline to tell, going Superman to Batman vs. Superman is not my ideal choice, but it still works. And then we come to the downfall. Suicide Squad. A movie that has nothing to do with the main story. Yes, Batman is in it, but it's greatly drifting away, and obviously they were trying to tell a little bit of a side story, but you don't do side stories that early on in your series. That would be like Marvel releasing Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, and then Guardians of the Galaxy, and it just would feel very disjointed. Actually, it'd be like them releasing Iron Man Civil War Guardians of the Galaxy, which is even worse, but that's not what we're here to talk about right now. Then we go into Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman was previously introduced in Batman vs. Superman. So when I showed my friend these movies, I just had him take out Suicide Squad, and then I was like, this actually kind of works. This actually feels like a straight up storyline and a straight up narrative, and you really see what Zack Snyder was doing and the world he was building there, and it was almost perfect. Granted, when we first got these movies, we got the 2017 version of Justice League. If we had gotten the 4-hour masterpiece that is the Snyder Cut, like I showed my friend, it would have been a completely different ball game right from jump, and then I think the series would have been able to flourish and keep going great. But the one element I would have changed is that third movie. I can't understand doing Suicide Squad as a third movie. Instead, I would have said, all hands on deck, Ben Affleck's Batman movie. That's your third movie. Then we have Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, Ultimate Edition, The Batman, whatever it would have been, titled, the Batman movie, learning more about Bruce Wayne and who he is. And then we go back in time to Wonder Woman, and we finish up your entire first phase with Justice League. It would have been great. You would have established your world. You would establish your three main characters being the DC Trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And then you would have came to an epic way beyond what Marvel did with the Avengers. I mean, Avengers was great, but Justice League is an epic that we didn't get. So I just think it's a shame that these movies didn't end up being what they could have been, and almost made people look at, DC and film like it can't compete with Marvel, when DC was our main source for superhero movies for the longest time before Marvel started to get a footing with X-Men in 2000, and then we started to get some competition before Marvel really did just take over. And now we're heading into a brand new series with Superman Legacy. I do like the fact that we're starting fresh with a new Superman. It is just a shame because Man of Steel built up the world so perfectly, and we're not getting that origin again. And we probably won't be able to see a series like that and really build up Superman the way the DC animated universe did. And I think that's just a shame that we won't be able to get such a perfectly told story that we see with the DCAU and with comics told in live action, because it can't be done, because Man of Steel was already made. It did that origin story. And, just a few minor tweaks with the DCEU, swapping out Suicide Squad for our Batman movie, establishing our Trinity, would have seen an entirely different ball game of a series, would have felt more cohesive, and maybe even a little bit more slowed down, and realizing we don't have to compete with where Marvel is at with their movies. We can compete with them utilizing the great stories we already have and the great characters we already have, and tell an incredibly cohesive story. but that's just my thoughts. So let me know down in the comments what you think would have made the DCEU even better or just enhanced it at all. What choices do you think were wrong and what choices do you think were right? And also let me know your favorite DCEU movie down below, and we'll see you guys next time.